I never saw it coming. Standing in the back of the church, clutching my vintage handbag and wearing the simple blue dress I'd carefully saved for months to buy, I overheard my future daughter-in-law's words pierce through the air like daggers. God, I hope his mother doesn't embarrass us today. She's sweet, but so common. Too poor to even afford proper wedding attire. Her bridesmaids' laughter echoed in the small room, unaware I was just outside. Little did they know that in exactly 3 hours, the priest would announce my $50 million donation to the children's hospital where my son first met his bride, leaving everyone, especially her, in stunned silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The worst part wasn't the cruel words or the mocking laughter. It was the way my son, Michael, remained silent, offering only an uncomfortable smile in response. The son I had raised alone since he was 4, working 3 jobs to put him through college, now stood wordlessly as his future wife reduced me to nothing more than an embarrassment. I stepped back quietly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The church's stained glass windows cast colorful shadows across the marble floor as I retreated to a small side chapel. I needed a moment to breathe, to process what I'd just heard. The wedding was set to begin in less than an hour, and hundreds of guests were already arriving, most of them Victoria's friends and family, all dripping in designer clothes and diamonds. My hands trembled as I smoothed down my dress. I'd spent weeks searching for something appropriate, something that wouldn't look out of place among the wealthy crowd my son now belonged to. The blue dress had cost me 3 months of careful saving, but now it felt like a child's costume next to Victoria's world of luxury. "Mrs. Daniels, are you all right?" Father Thomas appeared in the doorway, his kind eyes full of concern. He had known me for years, had watched Michael grow up in our modest neighborhood. "I'm fine," I lied, blinking back tears. "Just a little overwhelmed." He nodded sympathetically, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "Remember, Margaret, true worth isn't measured in dollars." If only Victoria and her friends understood that. If only my own son still believed it. I hadn't always lived a modest life. There was a time when I had everything: a beautiful home in Connecticut, a successful husband, financial security that I took for granted. Richard and I had been college sweethearts, married young and ambitious. He was brilliant with investments, turning our modest savings into a small fortune by the time Michael was born. We were happy, truly happy, until that rainy Tuesday when everything changed. Richard was driving home from a business meeting when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. The collision was instant, fatal. I became a widow at 32 with a 4-year-old son and a mountain of unexpected debt. Richard had been in the middle of restructuring his business, and his sudden death left our finances in chaos. I sold our house, our cars, my jewelry, everything, to pay off creditors and provide some stability for Michael. We moved to a small apartment in a different neighborhood, and I took whatever jobs I could find. Receptionist during the day, online customer service at night, weekend shifts at a local diner. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Michael never complained, not once. He wore secondhand clothes without protest, ate simple meals with gratitude, and excelled in public school. Every night I'd help him with homework, exhausted but determined. "Education is the one thing no one can take from you," I'd tell him. He'd nod solemnly, his father's intelligent eyes looking back at me. What Victoria and her friends didn't know, what no one knew except Father Thomas and my dear friend Eleanor, was what happened 10 years after Richard died. His former business partner, James, had tracked me down with unexpected news. A small investment Richard had made in a tech startup before his death had finally matured. The company had gone public, and our share was worth millions. I could have changed our lives instantly. We could have moved to a mansion, bought luxury cars, lived the high life. But something stopped me. Michael was 14 then. kind-hearted but impressionable. I'd watched him grow up valuing hard work, education, and character above material things. Would sudden wealth change that? Would it erase the lessons we'd learned together? So I made a decision. I put the money into a trust, telling no one except my two confidants. I continued working my multiple jobs. We stayed in our small apartment. Michael kept wearing secondhand clothes and earning scholarships. I wanted him to build his own success, to know he could stand on his own feet without relying on inherited wealth. The only difference was that I could finally breathe a little easier. I could afford health insurance. I could save for retirement. I could secretly help pay for his college when his scholarships fell short, and most importantly, I could plan for a legacy that would truly matter. As Michael grew up, graduated college, and started his career in medicine, I watched with pride. He became a pediatric surgeon, saving children's lives with his skilled hands. He was compassionate, brilliant, respected by his colleagues. Everything a mother could hope for. Then he met Victoria at the children's hospital where he worked. She was from a wealthy family, volunteering on the hospital's fundraising board. More for social connections than genuine charity, I would later learn. She was beautiful, polished, and from a world so different from ours. Michael was instantly smitten. At first, Victoria was perfectly pleasant to me. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, but she made appropriate conversation at dinners and asked polite questions about Michael's childhood. I tried so hard to connect with her, bringing homemade desserts to their apartment, offering to help with wedding planning, sending thoughtful cards on holidays. Gradually, though, the invitations to their events became less frequent. Michael's calls grew shorter, his visits rare. When they bought their first home together, a sprawling place in the expensive part of town, I wasn't invited to the housewarming. I only saw pictures on social media, where Victoria posed in carefully staged rooms with people I didn't recognize. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She's just busy with work and wedding planning, Michael would explain when I asked why I hadn't seen them in weeks. It's nothing personal, Mom. But it was personal. It became obvious in 100 small ways. The way Victoria would check her watch when I was speaking. The way she'd interrupt to change the subject whenever I mentioned my volunteer work at the community center. The way she'd exchange glances with her friends when I wore the same dress to multiple events. I tried harder. I studied fashion magazines to understand her world. I practiced topics I thought might interest her. I even took a part-time job at an upscale department store to get a discount on nicer clothes, hoping to bridge the gap between our worlds. Nothing worked. To Victoria, I remained Michael's embarrassing mother, the woman who had worked as a waitress, who lived in a modest rental, who couldn't afford to contribute to their lavish wedding. What she didn't know was that I had quietly paid off the remainder of Michael's medical school loans the previous year, $178,000 that he believed had been reduced through a forgiveness program. As the wedding approached, I was included in fewer and fewer decisions. My suggestions for the ceremony were politely dismissed. My offer to host a small family dinner was declined. I wasn't even asked to join the mother of the groom dress shopping expedition. Victoria's mother simply informed me what color would be appropriate for me to wear. Standing in that chapel after overhearing Victoria's cruel words, I finally faced the truth I'd been avoiding. My son had become ashamed of me. The boy who once proudly introduced me to his teachers, who bragged about my 3 jobs to his friends, who wrote a college essay about my resilience. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who remained silent while the woman he loved mocked his mother's poverty. Father Thomas placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The ceremony will be starting soon. Would you like me to walk you to your seat?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Just give me 1 minute." When he left, I opened my handbag and took out an envelope. Inside was the letter I'd been working on for weeks, finalizing the details of my donation to the Children's Hospital. $50 million for a new pediatric research wing. It had taken months of meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, and hospital administrators to structure everything perfectly. Originally, I had planned to make the announcement next week, after Michael and Victoria returned from their honeymoon. The donation would be anonymous to the public, but known to the hospital board. I wanted to surprise Michael, to show him that his work had inspired me, that his dedication to healing children had given purpose to Richard's unexpected legacy. But now, looking at that envelope, a different thought crossed my mind. Not revenge. I loved my son too much for that, but perhaps a lesson, a reminder of the values he once held dear, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to be seen clearly by my child again. I tucked the envelope back into my bag and straightened my shoulders. The wedding would proceed as planned. I would smile, I would congratulate, I would dance and celebrate my son's happiness. But before the day was over, something would change. Not just for Victoria, but for Michael, for all of us. The church was beautiful, I had to admit. White roses and lilies adorned every pew. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. The string quartet played Bach with perfect precision. It was exactly the kind of wedding Victoria had always dreamed of. Elegant, exclusive, expensive. The kind where every detail photographed perfectly for social media. I sat in the front row, the designated spot for the mother of the groom, feeling strangely detached as I watched guests file in. Victoria's family filled half the church, cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends, all impeccably dressed. Her father, a prominent investment banker, greeted people with practiced charm. Her mother, surgically enhanced to perfection, directed the photographers with subtle hand gestures. On our side, the pews were sparser. Michael had invited colleagues. From the hospital, a few college friends. My sister Julia sat beside me, squeezing my hand occasionally. We had both worked service jobs most of our lives, both lived in the same modest neighborhood, both raised our children to value character over cash. "You look beautiful," she whispered, adjusting the small fascinator I wore. "That blue brings out your eyes." I smiled gratefully, though my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about the envelope in my bag, about the meeting I'd had with Father Thomas 2 days earlier. He had known Richard, had counseled me through grief, had watched Michael grow up. He understood why I'd kept the money secret all these years, and he had agreed to help with what I was about to do. The music changed. The guests stood. Victoria appeared at the back of the church on her father's arm, a vision in designer white, her dress reportedly costing more than my annual income. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with her perfect features arranged in an expression of practiced joy. Michael waited at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes fixed on his bride. I felt a rush of love so powerful it nearly knocked me over. Despite everything, he was still my son, still the baby I had nursed, the boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed for. I wanted him to be happy. I just wasn't sure anymore if Victoria would make him truly happy, or merely successful in the eyes of others. The ceremony proceeded with flawless precision. Vows were exchanged, rings were placed, blessings were given. I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, genuinely moved to see my son making this commitment, even as doubt lingered in my heart. Then came the moment I had arranged with Father Thomas. Just before the final blessing, he cleared his throat and addressed the congregation. "Before we conclude this sacred ceremony, I have a special announcement," he said, his voice warm but authoritative. "It is my privilege to share some extraordinary news with you all, particularly with Michael, who has dedicated his career to healing children." Victoria looked confused. This wasn't in the meticulously planned program. Michael tilted his head slightly, curiosity in his eyes. The Children's Hospital where Michael works has just received its largest donation in history, Father Thomas continued. A gift of $50 million to establish the Richard Daniels Memorial Pediatric Research Wing, named after Michael's late father. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Victoria's parents exchanged glances. Michael's eyes widened. "This extraordinary gift," Father Thomas said, looking directly at me, "comes from one person whose generosity has been matched only by her humility. For years, she has worked multiple jobs, lived modestly, and sacrificed personally while quietly managing the fortune that resulted from her late husband's investment." I felt hundreds of eyes turn toward me. Victoria's expression froze somewhere, between shock and disbelief. Michael stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "Margaret Daniels," Father Thomas announced, "has chosen this day to reveal her gift, hoping it will inspire others to recognize that true worth isn't measured in appearances, but in contribution to humanity." The silence that followed was profound, broken only when my sister Julia began to applaud. Slowly, others joined in. First Michael's colleagues from the hospital, then his friends, then eventually the entire congregation, rising to their feet, in a standing ovation. I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't wanted applause or recognition, but as I stood, acknowledging their response with a small nod, I caught Michael's eye. In that moment, something passed between us, a question, a realization, perhaps the beginning of understanding. Victoria remained seated, her perfect smile nowhere to be seen, and as the applause continued around us, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The woman everyone had dismissed as too poor had just changed everything. Not out of spite or revenge, but because it was finally time to step back into the light. The reception that followed was surreal. Held at Victoria's parents' country club, it was every bit as lavish as she had planned. Crystal centerpieces, champagne fountains, a 10-piece orchestra. But the atmosphere had shifted fundamentally. As I entered the grand ballroom, conversations hushed momentarily before resuming with renewed energy. People who had barely acknowledged me at the ceremony now approached with warm smiles and extended hands. Victoria's father, Robert Preston, made a beeline toward me, champagne flute in hand. "Margaret, we clearly need to have a proper conversation. Victoria never mentioned your background." His voice dripped with the particular tone wealthy people use when they suddenly realize someone has more money than they do. "There wasn't much to mention," I said simply. "I'm still the same person I was yesterday." He laughed as if I'd said something delightfully amusing. "Modest, too. We must have you over for dinner when the kids return from Bora Bora. I have some investment opportunities you might find interesting." Before I could respond, Victoria's mother appeared at his side, her surgical enhancements somehow more noticeable, under the ballroom lights. "Margaret, darling," she gushed, air-kissing near my cheeks. "That dress is so charming. We should go shopping together. I know all the best boutiques." The same woman who had once looked at me with barely concealed disdain now acted as if we were old friends. I smiled politely, excused myself, and moved toward the bar. I ordered a simple glass of water, needing clarity amid the suddenly suffocating attention. "Quite a day, isn't it?" The voice beside me belonged to Dr. Sarah Chen, the hospital's chief of pediatrics, and one of the few people who knew about my donation before today. "Not exactly what I had planned," I admitted. She smiled knowingly. "Anonymity would have been more your style, but sometimes the universe has other ideas." She glanced around the room, at the people now watching us curiously. "Your son is an exceptional surgeon, Margaret. One of the best I've ever worked with. That didn't come from money or privilege. That came from you." Her words warmed me, providing a moment of genuine connection amid the swirl of sudden, insincere interest. I watched as Victoria circulated among her guests, her expression tightly controlled, occasionally glancing in my direction with a look, I couldn't quite interpret. Something between confusion and calculation. Michael had disappeared shortly after we arrived at the reception. Part of me worried he was angry, that my revelation had stolen attention from his special day. Another part hoped he was simply processing, remembering, perhaps understanding, why I had made the choices I had. As the evening progressed, I found myself cornered by distant relatives of Victoria's, business associates of her father's, friends who suddenly discovered they had so much in common with me. Each conversation felt hollow, transactional, as if I had transformed from a person into a potential opportunity. "I hear you're interested in children's causes," said a woman who had earlier snubbed me in the receiving line. "I'm on the board of the most exclusive charity in the city. We have an opening for a major donor. My firm handles wealth management. For several billionaires," offered a man who hadn't bothered to introduce himself. "I'd love to show you how we could grow your portfolio." I smiled, nodded, deflected. This sudden attention. This wasn't what the money was for. It wasn't why I had preserved Richard's legacy all these years. I had wanted to make a difference, to honor his memory, to support our son's work-saving children. I hadn't wanted to become a target for social climbers and opportunists. I excused myself and stepped out onto the terrace, needing fresh air and a moment of quiet. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I remembered nights like this with Richard, planning our future, dreaming about the family we would raise. How strange life had become, so different from anything we could have imagined. "Mom?" I turned to find Michael standing in the doorway, his bow tie loosened, his expression unreadable. "Hi, sweetheart." My heart pounded as he approached. This was the conversation I had been both anticipating and dreading. He stopped beside me at the railing, looking out at the manicured grounds rather than at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I considered my answer carefully. At first, it was because I wanted you to become your own man, not someone defined by wealth. Later, I suppose I was waiting for the right moment. And my wedding day was it? There was an edge to his question. "That wasn't my original plan," I admitted. "I was going to tell you privately, after the honeymoon. The timing changed when I overheard Victoria this morning." He flinched slightly. "What did you hear?" "Enough. To know how she sees me. How perhaps you see me too." Michael turned to face me fully then, his expression pained. "Mom, I don't—" "You didn't defend me," I said quietly. "When she called me too poor, when she worried I would embarrass you, you didn't say a word." He looked down, shame evident in his posture. "I should have. I know that. It's just—" "Things have been complicated with Victoria's family. Her father helped me get the attending position at the hospital. Her connections have opened doors for my career. And my presence threatened that," I finished for him. "No, that's not it." But his protest lacked conviction. "It's just different worlds, Mom. You never seem to fit into their circles, their conversations." "I never tried to," I acknowledged. "Maybe that was my mistake. Or maybe I valued authenticity over appearance." He was silent again, struggling with words, with truth, with the realization that he had somehow lost sight of the values I had worked so hard to instill in him. "Why did you keep working those jobs?" he finally asked. "All those years, those long hours, those thankless positions. Why didn't you use the money to make life easier?" I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy who had once helped me count tips from the diner, who had worn patched jeans without complaint, who had worked alongside me cleaning houses to earn extra money for science camp. Something had changed in him, something fundamental. Life isn't about ease, Michael. It's about purpose. Those jobs taught me humility, patience, the value of honest work. They kept me grounded when grief could have destroyed me. They showed me sides of humanity I never would have seen from inside a bubble of wealth. I took a deep breath. And I wanted the same for you. I wanted you to become a doctor because you cared about healing, not because it was prestigious. I wanted you to choose a partner who loved you for your heart, not your bank account. I wanted you to build something meaningful with your own 2 hands. Tears filled his eyes. I did build something. I became the surgeon you encouraged me to be. I saved children's lives. Yes, I said softly, and I'm so proud of that. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The boy who once brought home stray animals to heal, who volunteered at homeless shelters on weekends, who looked people in the eye regardless of their status, that boy started caring about appearances, connections, fitting into a world that measures worth by wealth. He couldn't hold my gaze. Victoria isn't as shallow as you think, he said, but the defense sounded hollow even to him. She just wants certain things, a certain lifestyle. And you thought I couldn't understand that because I was poor, I finished. The irony is, Michael, I chose my lifestyle. Every day I chose purpose over luxury, substance over show. I had options you never knew about. A waiter appeared at the doorway, clearing his throat discreetly. Excuse me, Dr. Daniels. They're ready for your first dance. Michael nodded, then turned back to me. We need to finish this conversation. There's so much I didn't know. So much I didn't see. We will, I promised. But right now, your bride is waiting. He hesitated, then embraced me suddenly, fiercely, like he used to as a child. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered against my hair. As he pulled away, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years, recognition, not of my newly revealed wealth, but of me. The woman who had raised him, who had loved him unconditionally, who had sacrificed everything to give him a foundation of genuine value. He walked back into the reception, shoulders straighter than before, as if carrying a new awareness. I remained on the terrace a moment longer, watching the stars and feeling for the first time in years, truly seen. The evening continued with all the traditional elements of a lavish wedding: the first dance, the cake cutting, the toasts. I watched from a carefully neutral distance, neither seeking attention nor hiding from it. Victoria's eyes found me occasionally across the room, her expression now calculating rather than dismissive. She was reassessing, recalibrating our relationship in light of new information. When it came time for the mother-son dance, Michael crossed the room to where I stood and extended his hand with a formality that gradually melted into genuine warmth as we moved across the dance floor. I remember when you taught me to dance for middle school graduation, he said softly. We practiced in the living room with that old record player of Dad's. You kept stepping on my toes, I recalled with a smile. You never complained. Not about that, not about anything. His voice caught. Even when you were working 18-hour days, even when we couldn't afford new clothes, even when I got into Stanford and you had to sell your wedding ring to help with expenses. I looked up at him surprised. You knew about that? I found the empty jewelry box. I wasn't supposed to know, but I did. His eyes filled with tears again. You gave up everything for me. Not everything, I corrected gently. I gained a son who became a healer, who uses his hands to save lives. That's worth more than any ring. As the music ended, he leaned down and kissed my cheek. I don't deserve you, he whispered. It's not about deserving, I told him. It's about loving, and that has never been difficult with you. Later, as the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Victoria approached me, her perfect makeup still intact despite the late hour. Margaret, she said, her tone carefully modulated. I think we should talk. I nodded, following her, to a quiet corner away from the remaining guests. She straightened her shoulders, composing herself like someone preparing for a business negotiation. "I want to apologize for any misunderstandings between us," she began, her words precise. "I've always respected you as Michael's mother. It wasn't a genuine apology, we both knew that. But it was an attempt at saving face, at establishing a new dynamic between us. One where she could no longer dismiss me as irrelevant." "Victoria," I said gently, "you don't need to do this. The money doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change my values or my background. If those things bothered you before, they'll still bother you now." She blinked rapidly, unused to such direct conversation. "I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said this morning," I interrupted, still keeping my voice kind but firm. "You were embarrassed by me, by my clothes, my manner, my perceived poverty." She had the grace to look down, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "Here's what you should understand," I continued. "The money doesn't define me. It never has. What defines me is how I've lived, the choices I've made, the people I've helped along the way. That's the legacy I wanted for Michael. Not wealth, but purpose." Victoria looked genuinely confused, as if I was speaking a language she couldn't quite translate. "But now you can have both," she said. "The best clothes, the right connections, access to our world." "That's where you're mistaken," I said softly. "I don't want access to your world. I've built my own, one relationship at a time, one act of kindness at a time. And it's a world with different measures of success." She stared at me, struggling to comprehend a perspective so foreign to her own. Finally, she said, "I do love him, you know, Michael. It's not just about his career or his potential." For the first time, I heard a note of vulnerability in her voice, a glimpse of the insecurity that perhaps drove her constant striving for status and perfection. "I believe you," I said, and meant it. "And I hope you'll learn to love all of him, not just the surgeon with promising connections, but the boy who grew up valuing people over position, substance over style, because that's who he really is, beneath the surface you've been polishing." She didn't respond immediately, but I saw something shift in her expression. Not acceptance exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "I should get back to the guests," she finally said, smoothing her already perfect dress. "Of course." I smiled genuinely. "It was a beautiful wedding, Victoria. I wish you both every happiness." As she walked away, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Not because I had won some victory or proven some point, but because for the first time in years, I had spoken my truth without apology or fear. I had stood in my power, not the power of wealth, but the power of authenticity. The reception continued around me, but I felt separate from it somehow, as if watching from a distance. The elaborate centerpieces, the champagne towers, the photographer capturing carefully staged moments. It all seemed like an elaborate performance now, beautiful but somewhat hollow. I gathered my things, prepared to slip out quietly. There would be time later for deeper conversations with Michael, for reassessment and reconnection. Tonight had already held enough revelations. As I retrieved my wrap from the coat check, I felt a presence beside me. It was Father Thomas, who had joined the reception after the ceremony. "That was quite a moment in church," he said with gentle humor. "Not exactly what we rehearsed." I smiled ruefully. "Life rarely follows the script we write for it." "True enough." He helped me with my wrap. "You know, Margaret, what you did today, it wasn't just about the money." "No," I agreed. "It was about truth, about being seen for who I really am. And perhaps," he suggested, "about helping others see themselves more clearly, too." I thought about Michael's face during our dance, about Victoria's confusion as we spoke, about the values I had tried to instill and the example I had tried to set. "I hope so," I said softly. "I really hope so." As I walked toward the exit, I caught a glimpse of Michael watching me from across the room. Our eyes met briefly, a world of unspoken words passing between us. He nodded once, a small gesture that somehow contained recognition, respect, and perhaps a promise to remember who he really was, who we both were, beneath all the trappings of status and wealth. Outside, the night air felt fresh against my skin. Stars twinkled above, indifferent to human dramas of money and status. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. Whatever happened next with Michael and Victoria, I had reclaimed something essential: my voice, my dignity, my truth. The woman who drove home from that wedding wasn't the same woman who had arrived hours earlier, clutching her handbag and dreading judgment. She was stronger, clearer, more herself than she had been in years, not because of money revealed, but because of worth remembered. And that, more than any donation or revelation, was the true gift of the day. I found myself at a gas station on the edge of town, sitting in my 10-year-old sedan, staring at the dashboard without really seeing it. The wedding reception was still going on across town, champagne flowing, music playing, guests dancing beneath crystal chandeliers. But I couldn't stay there any longer, not with the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Julia. "You okay? That was quite a bombshell." I didn't respond immediately. Was I okay? I wasn't sure what I was feeling, relief perhaps, at no longer carrying my secret. Sadness that it had come to this. A strange emptiness now that the moment I'd both dreaded and anticipated had finally arrived. I put the key in the ignition, but didn't start the car. Instead, I reached for my purse and pulled out the small leather journal I'd carried for years. Its pages were worn, filled with my handwriting, calculations, plans, notes about the trust, ideas for the hospital donation. All the things I'd kept hidden from Michael, believing I was protecting him, preparing him for a life built on values rather than privilege. Had I been wrong? The question echoed in my mind as I flipped through the journal's pages. Had keeping the truth from him been a mistake? I had my reasons, good ones I thought. But seeing his face tonight, the shock and confusion, made me wonder if I'd overstepped, if I'd made choices for him that weren't mine to make. I started the car and drove, not toward my apartment but to the place where it all began. The children's hospital stood tall against the night sky, its windows illuminated here and there where doctors and nurses worked through the night, where parents sat vigil beside sick children, where healing and heartbreak lived side by side. The security guard recognized me from my many visits to discuss the donation. "Evening, Mrs. Daniels. Bit late for a meeting, isn't it?" I managed a small smile. Just needed to see the place. "Is Dr. Chen still here by any chance?" He checked his computer. "Left about an hour ago. Want me to call her?" "No, that's all right. I'll just take a walk around the garden if that's okay." He nodded, buzzing me through. The hospital's healing. Garden was one of my favorite places, a peaceful oasis of carefully tended plants, quiet fountains, and benches where families could find moments of respite amid medical crises. It was also where the new research wing would be built, extending from the eastern edge of the current building. I sat on a bench near the fountain, listening to the gentle splash of water. This was why I'd preserved the money all these years. Not to reveal it dramatically at a wedding, not to shock people who had underestimated me, but for this, to create something lasting, something that would save lives long after I was gone. The garden was empty at this hour, peaceful under the glow of soft landscape lighting. I closed my eyes, remembering the countless hours I'd spent in hospitals with Michael as he grew up. Not because he was sick, thankfully, but because he was drawn to medicine from an early age. He'd volunteer after school, reading to pediatric patients, helping with the therapy dogs program, eventually shadowing doctors during his college years. I had watched him discover his calling in these halls, had seen his face light up when he talked about a procedure he'd observed, or a child who'd smiled at him. That passion, that purpose, it had nothing to do with money. It was pure, genuine, the best of who he was. When had things changed? When had appearances begun to matter more than substance? When had he started to see me through different eyes, not as the mother who had sacrificed everything for him, but as someone inadequate, embarrassing, too poor to belong in his new world? Was it when he met Victoria? When he started rotating? Through her father's private practice? When he began attending galas and fundraisers where people discussed vacation homes and yacht clubs as casually as others might discuss the weather? Or had the seeds been there all along, planted in the moments when his friends had new toys we couldn't afford, when he had to work campus jobs while classmates partied, when he watched other mothers arrive at school events in luxury cars while I took the bus? I didn't blame him for wanting more, for being drawn to Victoria's world of ease and privilege. Who wouldn't be? The problem wasn't desire for comfort. It was forgetting what truly mattered along the way. Margaret? I opened my eyes to find Dr. Sarah Chen standing before me, still in her white coat despite the late hour. "I thought that was you," she said, sitting beside me. "Security called to let me know you were here. I was just finishing some paperwork." She studied my face. "Tough day?" I laughed softly. "You could say that." She nodded, not pushing for details. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two women who had found connection not through social circles, but through shared purpose. Sarah had been my main contact at the hospital throughout the donation process, the person who understood both the technical details of the research we would fund and the personal reasons behind my gift. "Having second thoughts about the announcement?" she finally asked. "Not about the donation," I clarified. "Never that. Just about everything else. The timing, the way it happened. I didn't want it to seem like I was showing off." Sarah's laugh was gentle. "Margaret, in the 2 years I've known you, showing off has never been your style. You wanted the donation to remain anonymous until I convinced you that attaching your name might inspire others." She was right. I had resisted using the Daniels name until Sarah pointed out that philanthropic gestures often created ripple effects. "People need to see that extraordinary generosity can come from ordinary lives," she had argued, "not just from billionaires." Michael seemed shocked. "I," said quietly. "Wouldn't you be? Finding out your mother had millions while you watched her work multiple jobs?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a revelation." Put that way, I could understand his confusion. I wanted him to build his own life, his own success. I was afraid the money would change his path. "And did keeping it secret change his path?" she asked gently. The question hit me with unexpected force. Had my well-intentioned secrecy somehow contributed to the distance between us? To his attraction to Victoria's world of status and appearance? Had I inadvertently pushed him toward valuing the very things I had tried to teach him to see beyond? "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Now I'm not so sure." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. "You know what we tell parents here when they're facing impossible decisions about their child's care? There are no perfect choices. There are only loving intentions and doing the best you can with the information you have." Her words loosened something in my chest. I had made my choices with love, with the deepest desire to raise a son who valued character over convenience. If those choices had led us here, to this complicated moment of revelation and reckoning, perhaps that was simply part of our journey together. "He'll have questions," Sarah continued. "Hard ones. You need to be ready to answer them honestly." "I know," I said, "and I will be." My phone buzzed again. Another text from Julia. "Michael's looking for you. He came to my table asking where you went. I showed the message to Sarah, who stood and offered me her hand. Go talk to your son, Margaret. Not as the woman who kept secrets or the mother who was misjudged, but as the person you truly are. Someone who has always put love above everything else. I nodded, suddenly feeling stronger. Thank you. As I drove back toward the reception venue, I thought about identity, how we see ourselves versus how others see us. For years, I had defined myself by my relationship to Michael, by my widowhood, by the jobs I worked and the sacrifices I made. I had allowed Victoria and her circle to define me by my apparent poverty, by what I lacked rather than what I carried within. Tonight had shattered those definitions. But what would take their place? Who was I beyond Michael's mother or secret millionaire? I was still contemplating this question when I pulled into the venue's parking lot. The reception was winding down, guests trickling out to waiting cars, servers clearing tables inside. I sat for a moment, gathering my courage, then walked back into the building I had fled hours earlier. Michael spotted me immediately, breaking off a conversation to cross the room. His bow tie was undone, his hair slightly disheveled, his expression a mixture of concern and lingering confusion. Mom, he said, reaching for my hands. Where did you go? I've been looking everywhere. I needed some air, I said simply. It's been a long day. He glanced around, then nodded toward a small anteroom off the main ballroom. Can we talk? Really talk? The room was quiet, furnished with a small sofa and 2 armchairs, a place for the bride to make last-minute adjustments or guests to take brief respite from the celebration. Michael closed the door behind us, muffling the music and chatter. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. All these years, Mom. All those extra shifts, those second-hand clothes, those times you went without so I could have something. You let me believe we were struggling. I sat on the edge of the sofa, gathering my thoughts. We were struggling. Michael, having money in a trust doesn't mean we weren't living with genuine limitations. But why keep living that way at all? He paced the small room, hands gesturing in frustration. Why keep working as a receptionist when you could have… When I could have what? I interrupted gently. Bought a mansion? Driven a luxury car? Hired staff to do the things I did myself? Would that have made us happier? It would have made life easier, he insisted. Easier isn't always better, I countered. The money came when you were 14, Michael. You were at such an impressionable age. I watched you developing into this compassionate, hard-working young man. I was terrified that sudden wealth would change your course. That wasn't your decision to make, he said, a flash of anger in his eyes. You didn't trust me. I trusted you completely, I corrected. What I didn't trust was the power of money to distort priorities. I've seen it happen to families, to entire communities. Sudden wealth can be like a tsunami. It might look exciting from a distance, but it can destroy foundations. He sat heavily in one of the armchairs, running a hand through his hair. So you just kept working those jobs? Kept living in that small apartment? Kept shopping at thrift stores? All while sitting on millions? I kept living authentically, I said. Those jobs weren't just about money, Michael. They connected me to people, to community. They gave me purpose during the darkest days after your father died. They taught me patience, humility, perspective. But you let me think we were poor, he persisted. You let me believe we couldn't afford things. We couldn't afford everything, I clarified. That's different from being destitute. I made choices about what mattered. Your education mattered. Your health mattered. Designer labels and status symbols didn't. And what about my medical school loans? He asked suddenly. Did that forgiveness program even exist? Or was that you too? I hesitated, then nodded. That was me. I couldn't bear to see you starting your career with that burden." He shook his head in disbelief. All this time, all these secrets. "I was going to tell you," I said quietly. "After the honeymoon. I had it all planned. A private dinner, the official announcement about the hospital wing, everything. Today wasn't how I wanted you to find out." "What changed?" I looked at him directly. "I heard Victoria this morning, in the church before the ceremony. I heard what she said about me." His face flushed with shame. "Mom, she didn't mean—" "Yes, she did," I said firmly. "And you know what? That's okay. She comes from a different world with different values. What hurt wasn't her words, Michael. It was your silence. You didn't defend me." He couldn't hold my gaze. "I know. I'm sorry." "When did I become someone you were ashamed of?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me all day finally finding voice. "I'm not ashamed of you," he protested, but the words lacked conviction. "Michael." My tone made him look up. "I raised you to be honest, especially with yourself. Something changed between us, and it started long before today. I need to understand what happened. When did my worth in your eyes become tied to my bank account?" He was quiet for a long time, struggling with the truth. Finally, he said, "It wasn't one moment. It was gradual. When I started working at Victoria's father's private practice, when I began meeting their friends, going to their homes, everything was so different, so much easier, smoother, more impressive. And then I'd come to your apartment, with the secondhand furniture and the leaky faucet you couldn't afford to fix, and I'd feel this disconnect. Between their world and ours, I supplied. He nodded uncomfortably. Victoria would ask questions about my childhood, about why we never took vacations, or why I worked all through college. At first, I told our story with pride. How you sacrificed everything after Dad died, how you taught me the value of hard work. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't understand. She pitied me. Pitied us. "And pity is a terrible thing to bear," I said softly, understanding all too well. "I started editing our story," he admitted, "focusing on achievements rather than struggles, avoiding details about the jobs you worked, steering conversations away from our background." Each word was a small pain, but I needed to hear them, needed to understand how my son, my kind, compassionate son, had gradually become someone who would stand silent while his fiancée mocked his mother. Then, "Her father helped me get the attending position," Michael continued. "Her mother introduced me to hospital board members. Suddenly, I was part of their world, galas, country clubs, vacation homes. And the more I fit in there, the more I felt the contrast when I came home to you." "So you came home less?" I observed, without accusation. He nodded, eyes downcast. I told myself it was because I was busy, because the commute was long. But really I was avoiding the discomfort of straddling those two worlds. "And Victoria encouraged the distance," I guessed. Not explicitly. He sighed. "She'd just make comments. About your clothes, your manner, your quaint apartment. She'd suggest alternative plans whenever I mentioned visiting you. It was subtle." "Until it wasn't," I said, remembering her words at the church. "Until I became someone too poor to belong at your wedding." "I should have stopped her," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "I should have reminded her that everything I am, everything I've achieved, I owe to you. To the mother who never missed a parent-teacher conference even when she worked 3 jobs, who helped me with science projects at midnight after coming home exhausted, who believed in me when no one else did." His voice broke on the last words, and I saw finally a glimpse of my son, my real son, beneath the polished exterior he'd adopted. "The money doesn't change any of that," I told him gently. It doesn't erase our history or rewrite who we are. That's what I've been trying to show you all along. True worth isn't in bank accounts or social connections. It's in how we treat people, in the difference we make. Like the hospital wing, he said quietly. I nodded. Your father would be so proud of the doctor you've become. Using your hands to heal, your mind to solve medical puzzles, your heart to comfort frightened children and worried parents. That's the legacy that matters, Michael. Not designer suits or country club memberships. He was silent for a moment, absorbing my words. Then he asked, What happens now? It was a loaded question, about the money, about our relationship, about his marriage to a woman who had judged me so harshly. Now we begin again, I said simply. With truth between us. With the understanding that I am exactly the same person I was yesterday. No more, no less. My bank account may have surprised you, but my values shouldn't have. And Victoria? He asked hesitantly. That's between you and her, I said. I'm not here to drive a wedge between you. I hope she can adjust her perspective, see beyond surface appearances. But that's her journey, not mine. He nodded slowly. She's been different since the announcement, quieter, keeps looking at me like she's trying to figure something out. Give her time, I advised. This is a shock for her, too. A knock at the door interrupted us. Victoria herself stood in the doorway, still in her wedding gown, though her elaborate updo had started to come undone, tendrils framing her face in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. They're asking for us, she said to Michael, then glanced at me. The car is waiting for the send-off. Michael looked torn, caught between his new wife and our unfinished conversation. Go, I encouraged. It's your wedding night. We'll have plenty of time to talk when you get back. He embraced me, holding on longer than usual. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I'm sorry I lost sight of that. I love you too, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Always have, always will. As he pulled away, Victoria lingered in the doorway. For a moment, I thought she might speak. Might offer some acknowledgement or apology. Instead, she gave me a small, uncertain nod before taking Michael's arm and leading him back to the reception. I remained in the quiet room for a few minutes, collecting myself. The day had been exhausting in every way, emotionally, physically, spiritually. But beneath the exhaustion was a current of something else. Not vindication exactly, but liberation. For the first time in years, I had stood fully in my truth. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had reminded my son, and myself, of who we really were beneath the roles and expectations others placed upon us. When I finally returned to the ballroom, most guests had moved outside for the departure ceremony. I followed, standing at the back of the crowd as Michael and Victoria ran through a tunnel of sparklers toward their waiting limousine, rose petals showering down around them. They looked beautiful, radiant, like figures from a fairy tale. But fairy tales, I knew, were just the beginning of the story. The real work, the messy, complicated, beautiful work of building a life together, came after the carriage drove away. Michael and Victoria would face that work with new understanding now, with truths revealed and pretenses stripped away. Whether their marriage would be stronger for it or ultimately falter under the weight of these revelations, only time would tell. As the limousine disappeared around the corner, guests began to disperse, returning to the ballroom for one last drink or heading to their cars. I found myself approached by Victoria's parents, Robert and Elizabeth Preston, their smiles overly bright. "Margaret, we simply must get together when the kids return," Elizabeth gushed. "I feel terrible that we haven't made more of an effort to include you in our gatherings." Robert nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. Perhaps you'd join us at the lake house next month? We're hosting a little fundraiser for the symphony. Right up your alley, I imagine." I looked at them, really looked at them. Beneath their polished exterior, I saw the calculation, the sudden reassessment of my value now that they knew about the money. They hadn't changed. Only their perception of me had. "Thank you for the invitation," I said politely. "But I've found that genuine connections aren't built on sudden revelations or changed circumstances. They develop naturally, over time, through mutual respect." Elizabeth's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, but—" "If you'll excuse me," I said gently, "it's been a long day. Please tell Victoria I wish her a wonderful honeymoon. She mentioned wanting to speak with you." Elizabeth hesitated. "I think she feels ashamed, not just about what she said, but about who she's been." "Shame isn't productive," I said. "Growth is. If she's ready to see me differently, I'm ready to see her differently too." As I drove home, I reflected on how quickly perceptions could change. Not just others' perceptions of me, but my own understanding of people like Elizabeth. Behind her polished facade was a woman with her own insecurities, her own regrets, her own desire for meaning beyond appearances. The following day brought another surprise. A letter arrived, not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter on thick stationery. The return address showed it had come from Bora Bora, sent just before Michael and Victoria left their honeymoon destination. I recognized Victoria's elegant handwriting on the envelope. With some trepidation, I opened it. "Dear Margaret," she began. "No, Mrs. Daniels, no formality, just my name. I'm writing this from the balcony of our villa, watching the sunset and thinking about the person I've become. Not someone I'm proud of. Someone who judges others by their possessions rather than their character. Someone who made you feel unwelcome and inadequate when you have shown nothing but grace. The revelation at our wedding was shocking, yes. But more shocking was realizing how easily I had dismissed you based on what I thought you lacked. Never bothering to see what you possessed in abundance, dignity, wisdom, strength of character. Michael has told me about your years raising him alone, about your countless sacrifices, about the values you instilled in him, the very qualities that made me fall in love with him in the first place. How ironic that I loved in him what I belittled in you. I don't expect forgiveness. What I said was unforgivable, but I am asking for a chance to start again, to know you, the real you. Not as Michael's mother or as a wealthy donor, but as Margaret, a woman I should have respected, all along. With deepest regrets and hopes for a new beginning, Victoria. I read the letter twice, searching for insincerity or calculation, finding instead what seemed like genuine remorse. People could change. I had to believe that. Not overnight. Not completely, but incrementally, meaningfully. Otherwise, what was the point of any of this? That evening, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was Michael standing in the hallway, looking tired but somehow lighter than he had at the wedding. "We just got back," he said, embracing me. "I came straight from the airport. Victoria's at her parents' house. She thought we might need some time alone." I invited him in, noticing how he looked around the apartment with new eyes. Not with embarrassment as he had in recent years, but with something like nostalgia, recognition of the home where he had grown up loved and secure despite our financial limitations. "I've been thinking about something," he said as we sat on the couch where I had read him bedtime stories, helped with homework, nursed him through childhood illnesses. "About that talk we had at the reception, when I asked why you kept working. Those jobs." I nodded, waiting. "You said it was about purpose, about connection." He ran a hand over the familiar fabric of the couch arm. "I understand that better now. The resort in Bora Bora was incredible. Private butler, infinity pool, champagne delivered to our door. But by the third day, I found myself volunteering at the local medical clinic in the village. This surprised me. During your honeymoon? He smiled sheepishly. Just for a few hours while Victoria was at the spa. They were short-staffed, mostly treating basic infections and minor injuries. Nothing like my work at home. His expression softened. But it felt so good, Mom. So real. Helping people who needed it, using my skills for something that mattered. I realized that's what you've been trying to show me all along. That the value is in the work itself, not in the status or money it brings. I felt a surge of hope. Not just that my son was finding his way back to himself, but that our relationship might find its way back to the authentic connection we once shared. Victoria noticed the change in me when I came back from the clinic, he continued. I was happier, more energized. It led to some really honest conversations between us about what we actually want in life versus what we think we should want. And what do you want? I asked. He thought for a moment. To be a good doctor, a good husband, eventually a good father. To make a difference in people's lives. All the things you taught me to value before I got distracted by appearances. Those things haven't changed, I reminded him. They've been there all along, waiting for you to remember them. I know, he said quietly. I lost my way for a while. Got caught up in a world that measures success by square footage and car models. It's an easy trap to fall into, I acknowledged, especially when that world offers such clear, tangible markers of achievement. But it's hollow, he said, with surprising certainty. I see that now. These past few days with Victoria, talking honestly about who we want to be together, what kind of life we want to build. It's been eye-opening for both of us. I thought about Victoria's letter, about Elizabeth's coffee confession, about the shifts that had begun with my unexpected revelation at the wedding. People were reconsidering not just who I was, but who they were in relation to me, and perhaps, in a larger sense, what truly mattered in their own lives. So what happens now? I asked, echoing the question he had posed to me at the reception. Now we rebuild, he said simply, with honesty this time. No more secrets, no more pretending, no more shame on either side. He took my hand. And maybe, if you're willing, you could help Victoria and me figure out how to use our privileges, all of them, including financial ones, for something meaningful. In that moment, I felt something click back into place between us. The connection that had been strained by unspoken judgments and growing distance. We weren't returning to our old relationship. We were creating something new, something potentially stronger because it was founded on complete truth. Michael stayed for dinner, helping me cook pasta the way we used to on Sunday nights when he was in high school. We talked about the hospital wing, about his ideas for research programs, about the children whose lives would be changed by expanded treatment options. His passion was genuine, his knowledge impressive. This was my son in his element, not at country club galas or exclusive dinner parties, but immersed in his calling to heal. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. Mom, I've been wondering something. If the announcement hadn't happened at the wedding, if you'd told me privately like you planned, would you have ever gone public with it? Or would you have kept living this way, working those jobs, staying in this apartment? I considered the question seriously. I might have made some changes, moved somewhere with better security, reduced my work hours to focus more on the hospital project. But fundamentally, I wouldn't have changed who I am or how I live. That was never about the money, Michael. It was about what gives my life meaning. He nodded slowly. I'm beginning to understand that. Really understand it, not just intellectually. After he left, I stood at my window watching him drive away, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. The secret I had carried for so long had finally been revealed, not in the way I had planned, but perhaps in exactly the way it needed to be. Sometimes the hardest conversations, the most painful revelations, are precisely what we need to find our way back to truth. As the streetlights came on outside my window, I made a decision. It was time to write my own story. Not the one others were telling about the secret millionaire. Not the one Victoria had assumed based on my modest circumstances. Not even the one Michael had edited to fit his new social circle. My true story, with all its complexity and contradiction, its sacrifice and purpose, its quiet dignity and unshakable strength. Tomorrow, I would begin looking for that house with a garden. I would continue my volunteer work. I would meet with the hospital board about the research wing. I would have coffee with Victoria if she was ready. I would move forward into this new chapter with the same values that had guided me through the hardest days of my life. Because wealth hadn't changed who I was. It had simply revealed who everyone else had been all along. 3 months after the Yai wedding, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, morning light streaming through windows that overlooked a garden in full bloom. It wasn't an extravagant house, 4 bedrooms, a study, a sunroom perfect for reading, but it was mine, a sanctuary I had chosen with care, not for its address or status, but for the way it felt when I walked through the door, like coming home to myself. The kettle whistled on the stove. As I prepared my morning tea, I glanced at the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Today marked exactly 90 days since the revelation that had changed everything and nothing about who I was. 90 days of navigating a new reality, where people knew about my wealth, but were still learning about my worth. The doorbell chimed, right on schedule. Every Thursday morning for the past month, Victoria had arrived at 9 o'clock sharp for what she called our mentor sessions. But what were really conversations about values, purpose, and authenticity? Her idea, not mine. A surprise request after our first awkward meeting following her honeymoon. I opened the door to find her standing on the porch, elegant as always but somehow softer around the edges. The perfect blowout remained, the designer. Clothes hadn't changed, but something in her eyes had shifted. A new attentiveness, a genuine presence that had been missing before. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, offering a small smile. "I brought those books you recommended." She held up a canvas tote containing volumes on mindful philanthropy and purpose-driven wealth. "Come in," I invited. "The tea's just ready." We settled in the sunroom, where climbing jasmine framed views of the rose garden I'd planted immediately after moving in. Not the meticulously pruned showpieces Victoria's mother cultivated for garden club photographs, but hardy, fragrant, varieties chosen for their resilience and beauty. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," Victoria began, accepting her teacup, "about how charity events often focus more on the donors than the causes." I nodded, remembering our discussion about the performative nature of philanthropy in her social circle. "So I did something different," she continued. "Instead of hosting that cocktail fundraiser I mentioned, I spent the day volunteering at the Children's Hospital. Not in the administration office or with the board, but on the floors. Reading to patients, helping with art therapy, just being present." Her voice softened. There was this little girl, maybe 6 years old, receiving chemo. When I asked what story she wanted to hear, she didn't choose any of the books I brought. She pulled out this worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit and told me it was her favorite because it was about becoming real. Victoria's eyes met mine. "I've read that story a dozen times as a child, but I never understood it until yesterday. About how love makes you real, how being worn and shabby from being loved isn't something to hide. It's something to honor." I smiled, recognizing the progress in this realization. "It's a profound story, especially if you're ready to hear." I wasn't ready before," she admitted. "I was too busy trying to appear perfect to allow myself to be real." She set down her teacup. "The hospital staff told me you've been volunteering in that same program for years, that even now, with everything that's happened, you still come, in every Tuesday to read to the children." "Some commitments transcend circumstances," I said simply. "Those children don't care about my bank account. They care that I show up, that I see them, that I'm fully present for our time together. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Michael says that's what made you such a wonderful mother. That no matter how many jobs you were working, when you were with him, you were completely there. Not distracted, not thinking about other things. I tried to be, I acknowledged. It wasn't always easy, especially in those early years after Richard died. But children know when you're truly seeing them versus when you're just occupying the same space. She was quiet for a moment, turning her teacup slowly. I've been thinking about having children, she finally said, but I'm terrified I'll raise them with the same hollow values my parents instilled in me. The constant awareness of appearances, the measuring of worth by possessions or connections. This vulnerability, this genuine self-reflection, was new territory for Victoria. The woman who had once dismissed me as too poor for her wedding was now sitting in my sunroom asking, in her own way, for guidance. Awareness is the first step toward change, I offered gently. The fact that you're questioning those values means you're already breaking the cycle. But how did you do it? She pressed. How did you raise Michael to value substance over status when the whole world pushes in the opposite direction? I considered her question carefully. By example, mostly. Children learn from what we do, not what we say. When Michael saw me, treating the janitor at his school with the same respect I showed to the principal, he internalized that lesson. When he watched me choose integrity over convenience, generosity over self-interest, he absorbed those values. Victoria looked out at the garden. My mother hired people to plant her flowers, to make everything look perfect for garden club photos. But she never got her hands dirty. She never taught me the joy of watching something grow. She turned back to me. Would you teach me? About gardening, I mean. It seems like a good place to start learning about substance. The request surprised me, but I nodded. I'd like that. And so our Thursday meetings expanded to include time in the garden, Victoria gradually trading her perfect manicures for dirt under her fingernails, her designer clothes for jeans and t-shirts. She asked questions not just about roses and herbs, but about my life, my choices, the wisdom I'd gathered through years of both struggle and silent prosperity. It wasn't always smooth. Old habits of judgment sometimes slipped into her comments. Moments of status anxiety flared when acquaintances spotted her pulling weeds instead of lunching at the country club. But she was trying, genuinely, consistently, trying to see beyond the surface values that had shaped her. Michael visited often, sometimes with Victoria, sometimes alone. One evening in late September, he arrived unexpectedly as I was preparing dinner. "Something smells amazing," he said, kissing my cheek. "Dad's pasta sauce?" I nodded, touched that he remembered. "With basil from the garden, are you staying?" "If there's enough." He washed his hands at the sink, then automatically reached for a knife to chop vegetables, falling into our old routine as if the years of distance had never happened. "I had a patient today who reminded me of you." "Oh?" I stirred the sauce, listening. "A grandmother raising her grandson after her daughter died. Works 2 jobs, brings him to every appointment no matter what she has to rearrange." He chopped, methodically, the skill from years of surgical training evident in his precise movements. I found her crying in the hallway after I explained her grandson's treatment plan. Not because of the diagnosis, which is serious but treatable, but because she was worried about missing work during his hospital stays. I waited, sensing there was more to the story. "I told her about you," he said quietly. "Not about the money, but about how you raised me alone, how you worked multiple jobs and still never missed an appointment. I told her she wasn't alone, that the hospital had resources to help, that her grandson was lucky to have someone who put him first." He set down the knife, turning to face me. "Then I went to my office and established a fund for families like hers, caregivers who need financial support during their child's treatment. used some of my own money, got commitments from colleagues, approached the hospital board. Pride swelled in my chest. That's wonderful, Michael. It's what you would have done, he said simply. What you did do, in your own way, all those years. We worked side by side, preparing the meal in comfortable silence. There was healing in these mundane moments, in the rhythms of family life stripped of pretense or performance. Victoria's different, he said eventually, since your talks began. More present, more authentic, less concerned with how things look, and more interested in how they actually are. She's finding her way, I said. It takes courage to question the values you've been raised with. I should know, he acknowledged with a rueful smile. I lost my way for a while there. We all do sometimes, I reassured him. The important thing is finding our way back. After dinner, Michael helped me wash dishes. Another old ritual resumed. As he dried a serving bowl, he asked, Have you thought any more about the foundation idea? The one we discussed last week? I had been contemplating establishing a foundation focused on practical support for single parents, not just financial assistance, but mentorship, skill development, community building, the kind of holistic help I had needed during those early years of widowhood. I've scheduled a meeting with a nonprofit consultant, I told him. Next Wednesday. I want to make sure it's structured for maximum impact. He nodded approvingly. Dad would love this, using his legacy to help families stay strong, to give kids the foundation they need. I think so too, I agreed, softly. Richard had been gone for so long now, but in moments like these, I felt his presence, his values, his compassion, his belief in building something meaningful. The following week brought another unexpected visitor. Elizabeth Preston arrived at my door unannounced, looking uncharacteristically flustered. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. I was in the neighborhood and thought. We both knew she hadn't been in the neighborhood. Her home was across town in the most exclusive enclave of the city. Come in, I offered. I just made some iced tea. She followed me to the kitchen, her gaze taking in my home, not with the calculating assessment I might have expected months ago, but with genuine curiosity. You've created such a warm space, she observed. It feels peaceful. That's what I wanted, I said, pouring 2 glasses of tea. Not showiness, just comfort and beauty. We sat at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room, but the heart of the home where daily life unfolded in all its ordinary glory. Victoria told me about your gardening lessons, Elizabeth said. About the volunteering at the hospital, too. She seems happier, more centered. She's asking good questions, I replied. About what truly matters, about the kind of person she wants to be. Elizabeth looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. Questions I should have encouraged her to ask long ago. She met my eyes. Instead of teaching her that appearances are everything, that status is the ultimate currency. We all pass on what we know, I said gently. What we've learned ourselves. What I learned, she said with sudden rawness, was survival in a world where women were valued for their beauty, their social connections, their ability to enhance their husbands' images. I married Robert when I was 22, with no education beyond a finishing school certificate and no skills beyond hosting the perfect dinner party. This glimpse into Elizabeth's history surprised me. I had always seen her as the quintessential society matron born into privilege, never questioning her place in the world. My family lost everything when I was 16, she continued, her voice quieter now. My father's business collapsed. Our house was foreclosed on. My private school enrollment terminated mid-semester. Overnight, I went from being the popular girl everyone wanted to befriend to the charity case everyone pitied. That must have been incredibly difficult, I said, seeing her, truly seeing her, for perhaps the first time. She nodded. I swore I would never be vulnerable like that again. I cultivated the right friends, married the right man, created the perfect image. I taught Victoria to do the same because I thought I was protecting her. From what? I asked. From the pain of exclusion, from the whispers and sidelong glances, from ever feeling like she didn't belong. Elizabeth sighed deeply. But in protecting her from those experiences, I prevented her from developing the resilience, the authenticity, the depth of character that you instilled in Michael. The admission hung between us, honest, painful, transformative. It's not too late, I said after a moment. For Victoria, or for you. That's why I'm here, she replied, to ask for your help. My help? The hospital board is establishing a new community outreach initiative, she explained, bringing medical care to underserved neighborhoods, providing health education, connecting families with resources. They've asked me to lead it. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. Elizabeth Preston's involvement with the hospital had always seemed more social than substantive. I know what you're thinking, she said with unexpected self-awareness. That I'm the last person who should lead such a program. And you're probably right. I know nothing about actual community needs or how to address them authentically. So, why did they ask you? Because of my connections, my fundraising ability. She shook her head. The very qualities that seem increasingly hollow to me now. And you want my help because you understand what it means to actually serve a community, not just use it as a line in a society column. She leaned forward intently. I'm not asking you to do the work for me. I'm asking you to teach me, to help me understand what meaningful service looks like, to guide me in using my social capital for genuine good, not just appearances. I studied her, looking for signs of insincerity or calculation. Instead, I saw a woman in the midst of her own awakening, tentative, imperfect, but genuine. It won't be easy, I warned. Real community work means getting uncomfortable, listening more than speaking, confronting privilege and biases you might not even realize you have. I know, she said. Or at least, I'm beginning to know. But I want to try, for Victoria, for myself, for all the years I spent valuing the wrong things. In that moment, I understood something profound about influence and change. My revelation at the wedding hadn't just affected my relationship with Michael or Victoria's perception of me. It had created ripples that reached far beyond what I could have anticipated, challenging long-held assumptions and opening possibilities for transformation in unexpected places. We could start next week, I suggested. There's a community health assessment happening at the center where I volunteer. It would be a good opportunity to listen and learn. Relief and gratitude washed over Elizabeth's face. Thank you, Margaret. Truly. After she left, I sat in my garden, watching butterflies dance among the flowers I'd planted, from caterpillar to chrysalis to winged beauty, a transformation that required both struggle and surrender. Perhaps that was the metaphor for what was happening in all our lives. The breaking open of old identities, the vulnerable middle state of becoming, the eventual emergence of something new and beautiful. The groundbreaking ceremony for the hospital wing took place in early October, a perfect autumn day with crisp air and golden sunshine. I stood beside Michael at the podium, feeling Richard's presence as the hospital administrator spoke about the lives that would be changed through the research and treatment the new facility would enable. Victoria sat in the front row, not on her phone or posing for photos as she might have done months ago, but listening intently, genuinely engaged. Beside her, Elizabeth and Robert Preston, the former watching with newfound understanding, the latter still adjusting to the shifts in his family's dynamics. When it came time for me to speak, I looked out at the gathered crowd: hospital staff, community members, patients and their families, reporters, donors. Not so long ago, I would have been terrified to stand before such an audience, to be the center of attention. But the woman who had hidden for so long was gone, replaced by someone who understood that her voice mattered, that her story might help others find their own path to authenticity. The Richard Daniels Memorial Pediatric Research Wing isn't just a building, I began. It's a promise. A promise to children fighting impossible battles that they won't fight alone. A promise to families facing their darkest hours that there is light and hope ahead. A promise to researchers and medical staff that their dedication will be supported with the resources they need to make breakthroughs. I glanced at Michael, drawing strength from his encouraging nod. My late husband, Richard, was a man who believed in quiet integrity, in building things that last, in making a difference without seeking the spotlight. When he died suddenly, leaving me with a 4-year-old son and an uncertain future, I made a promise to honor his values in how I raised our child and how I lived my own life. The crowd was silent, attentive. Many of you know part of my story. Now, about the investment that matured years later, about my choice to continue living simply while preserving that legacy for something meaningful. What you might not know is why that choice matters. I took a deep breath, sharing the truth. I had come to understand more fully in recent months. In a world increasingly focused on appearances, on status, on portraying perfect lives through filtered photos and curated experiences, there is profound power in choosing substance over show, in valuing connection over collection, in measuring success not by what we accumulate, but by the lives we touch and the good we create. From the corner of my eye, I saw Victoria reach for Michael's hand, saw Elizabeth listening with tears in her eyes. This research wing represents far more than a financial gift. It represents a belief that every child deserves the best chance at health, regardless of their family's resources. It represents hope that transcends social boundaries and financial status. Most importantly, it represents the truth that our greatest legacy isn't what we have, but what we give. Not what we display, but what we build. Not how we appear, but who we truly are. As applause filled the air, I felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. The woman who had stood frozen in a church hallway, wounded by cruel words about being too poor to belong, had found her voice, her power, her purpose. Not through wealth revealed, but through values steadfastly maintained. The reception following. The ceremony gave me a chance to connect with the families who would benefit from the new wing, to hear their stories of struggle and hope, to see in their eyes the real impact of the resources we were providing. These conversations, not the congratulations from influential donors or coverage in prestigious publications, were what filled my heart with certainty that every choice, even the difficult ones, had led to exactly where I needed to be. Later, as the crowd thinned, I found myself alone with Michael by the architectural rendering of the completed wing. "Dad would be so proud," he said quietly. "Not just of the donation, but of how you've handled everything. With dignity, with purpose, with such clear vision." "He would be proud of you too," I told him. "The doctor you've become, the man you are, the values you're reclaiming." Michael looked thoughtful. "Victoria and I have been talking about moving." This surprised me. "Moving? But you just renovated your house." "It's too much," he admitted. "Too big, too showy, too focused on impressing others. We're looking at places closer to the hospital, smaller homes with character rather than mansions with status." I smiled, hearing in his words the echoes of lessons learned long ago and recently remembered. "And Victoria's starting a new project," he continued, "working with long-term pediatric patients to create art for the new wing. Not as a photo opportunity, but as genuine therapy for the kids and education for herself." She mentioned that, I said. She seems truly invested. Michael nodded. She is. We both are. Learning to measure success differently, to find fulfillment, in contribution rather than accumulation. He turned to face me fully. You showed us that, Mom. Not by preaching or judging, but by living it consistently, even when you thought no one was watching. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows, across the hospital grounds, we walked together toward the parking lot, not as mother and son divided by misunderstandings and unspoken resentments, but as two people connected by love, by shared values rediscovered, by mutual respect hard-won through honest conversation. The woman who drove home that evening was neither the struggling widow who had hidden her wealth for years, nor the suddenly revealed millionaire who had shocked a wedding congregation. She was simply Margaret Daniels, mother, philanthropist, gardener, teacher, friend. A woman comfortable in her own skin, clear in her purpose, rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. As I turned into my driveway, lights from my new home glowed welcomingly. Inside were the treasures I had carried from my apartment, photo albums documenting Michael's childhood, Richard's favorite books, handmade quilts from my mother, simple furnishings chosen for comfort rather than show. But there were new treasures too. Fresh flowers Victoria brought to our Thursday meetings, the nonprofit business plan Michael and I were developing together, the garden journal Elizabeth and I had started to document our shared learning. These were the true riches of a life well lived, not the numbers in my bank account or the address on my mailbox, but the relationships renewed, the purpose reclaimed, the authenticity embraced without apology or fear. Standing in my kitchen that evening, I opened Victoria's letter once more, rereading her words about learning to value character over possessions. Then I took out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write, not just to her, but to all the women who would come after me in the foundation we were establishing. Women who needed to know that their worth wasn't measured by their circumstances, that their struggles didn't define them, that their voices mattered regardless of their bank accounts. Your value, I wrote, has never been about what you own, but about who you are. In a world that constantly tries to define you by your appearance, your possessions, your status, remember this truth. You are not what you have. You are what you give. You are not how you look. You are how you love. The words flowed easily, truthfully, from a place of hard-won wisdom. And as I wrote by the soft lamplight, I knew that the greatest revelation from that wedding day wasn't about money at all. It was about the courage to stand in your truth, to live your values consistently even when no one is watching, to define success on your own terms rather than society's. That was the real legacy I hoped to leave. Not buildings. With my name, not newspaper articles about secret millions, but lives touched by the example of authentic living, one garden, one conversation, one moment of genuine connection at a time. Because in the end, I hadn't needed to be rich to be valuable. I had been valuable all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.